From Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 to 20. Yahweh your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your people. To that prophet you must listen. It was this that you asked of Yahweh your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, "Let us not hear again the voice of Yahweh our God, nor see the great fire again, or we will die." And Yahweh said to me, "This is well said. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their people, into whose mouth I will put my words, and that person will tell them all that I command. If any person will not listen to what my prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call that person to answer for this. But if a prophet presumes to speak in my name a message that I have not commanded to be spoken, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet will die." And from the New Testament, Mark chapter 1, verses 21 to 28. Then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath day, Jesus went right to the synagogue and started teaching. They were astonished at his teaching, since he would teach them on his own authority, unlike the scholars. Now right there in their synagogue was a person possessed by an unclean spirit, which shouted, "Jesus, what do you want with us, you Nazarene? Have you come to get rid of us? I know you, who you are, God's holy man." But Jesus yelled at it, "Shut up and get out of him." Then the unclean spirit threw the man into convulsion, and letting out a loud shriek, it came out of him. And they were all so amazed that they asked themselves, "What's this? A new kind of teaching backed by authority? He gives orders even to unclean spirits, and they obey him?" So his fame spread rapidly everywhere throughout Galilee and even beyond. And our contemporary reading today is titled May Grace, number 97, a poem by Dennis McCarty. In living out each moment, may we be ever mindful that we have been favored with precious gifts. We have eyes with which to peer into the darkest corners. We have ears with which to listen to the stories of our fellow human beings. We have hands with which to work towards transformation. Together, surely, we are the answer that is blowing in the wind.
Thank you, Jeannie. May these words be a blessing to all who have gathered here, and may our word be a blessing to others. At first blush, this morning's reading from the first chapter, verses 21 to 28 of Mark's Gospel, must strike most of us gathered here this morning as being rather bizarre. Perhaps as even unbelievable to us, especially because we are the technological age, the scientific age of the 21st century. There's that bit that Jeannie read to us about Jesus exorcising demons. Not many of us these days, if anybody, interprets the world or their life or their own lives through unclean spirits or demon possession or exorcism. For most of us, I dare say, stories like that are sheer fiction, pretty much the stuff of pop culture, the horror movies, and that sort of thing. Perhaps some of you, as you listened to Jeannie read this morning's assigned gospel reading, thought about Jesus exorcising a demon from a fellow in the synagogue, and then thought about that 1973 movie called The Exorcist. Do you remember it? If anyone has seen it, it starred Linda Blair, a 12-year-old girl possessed by one of Satan's dreadful demons named Pazuzu. Pazuzu came straight from hell in that movie and wickedly possessed her body, mind, and soul. And the story, too, is about two Roman Catholic priests who tried to exorcise the demon from Reagan. So as you listened to Jeannie read the first chapter of Mark and heard about the demon-possessed guy in the synagogue, you might have had mental pictures of something from The Exorcist. Maybe a guy who, like an owl, who could rotate his head 360 degrees. Or maybe someone who is making loud guttural noise or foaming at the mouth or barking like a dog. You might have also pictured Jesus as a really cool dude, just like a superhero from the Marvel comics and movies, confronting that powerful and wicked demon, going toe-to-toe with the thing, exorcising it, and then coming out of it all totally unscathed. Now, if you had something like that in your mind, I have one thing to say. Please put all that literalistic hocus pocus out of your mind right now. Erase it. Erase it entirely. You see, there's something else going on in Mark's story. Something that a first century audience would have got just like that. But because we're so far removed, it's some 2,000 years removed from it, that we miss it. Or to come at this from a slightly different angle, there's a lot of stuff going on in this story between the lines. And it's my job as your minister to bring to your attention and shed light what's going on between the lines in the gospel stories. So I'm going to develop some of this between the lines stuff this morning. This is what ministers are paid to do. It's also what gives us a bit of job security. So let's take a few moments and we'll unpack this story about Jesus and the guy with an unclean spirit in order to see what's actually going on in this morning's gospel reading from the first chapter of Mark. You'll recall from last week that Jesus has just left the Lake of Galilee. That's where he called his disciples, Simon and Andrew, James and John. And now he's in Capernaum. And Capernaum is a harbor village. It's a center of resistance by local fishermen to Herod Antipas's control of the local fishing industry. A resistance moving is growing because what Antipas has done has left them and their families impoverished and marginalized. It should be noted too, most importantly, that the gospel writer Mark, for him, this is his very first story about Jesus' public ministry. It's his very first story that tells us, from his point of view, who is Jesus and what is Jesus all about. And now I'm going to turn to my first reading between the lines. As I just mentioned, the story takes place in Capernaum, in the synagogue in Capernaum. You have to remember that in Jewish life, the synagogue is the very center, the very heart of Jewish social and spiritual life. The synagogue is a sacred place. And you'll remember from what Jeannie read too, that it's the Sabbath day. And so we're dealing with sacred time. All of the action in this story takes place in sacred space and in sacred time. Picture, if you will, Jesus striding up to the front of the synagogue, up the aisle, center aisle, goes straight to the pulpit and starts preaching and teaching. The assembled people are absolutely astounded by his words. They're utterly amazed. Why? Because Jesus speaks with authority they've never heard before. Not the same authority as the scribes and the scholars. A whole different way of teaching and preaching the way they've been instructed in the past. Now you have to appreciate that in the ancient Greek language, the word astounded, it's a very, very strong one. It means Jesus' teaching and preaching are striking, that they have an enormous impact on his audience or on his congregation. You also have to appreciate that Jesus taught with authority, with authority. And in ancient Greek, the term with authority means that Jesus had moral authority. Moral authority. And more than that, Jesus' moral authority rang true for the ordinary people sitting in the synagogue, because they knew that such preaching and such teaching had long been recognized as delegated authority, which means that God has given that authority directly to a person. And as a consequence, what Jesus spoke that day in the Capernaum synagogue not only informed those people listening to them, but transformed them as well, changed them totally. That is reading, the first reading between the lines of this story. And now I'll turn to the second reading between the lines in this story about the beginning of Jesus' ministry, as Mark tells it in the first chapter of his gospel. Sitting in the synagogue that day, that Sabbath day, were the scribes. The scribes. Now, who in the world were the scribes? Well, during the time of Jesus' public ministry, the scribes were the religious scholars and the religious authorities of the day. And Jesus had a problem with them. Not just a little problem, but a big problem, a humongous problem. Listen to this verse. His words as recorded and reported in the 14th chapter of Mark. Jesus said, "Beware the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive greater condemnation." According to the New Testament scholar Ched Myers and later the Mennonite preacher Sherry Hosteler, Jesus had a big problem with the scribes because they got rich and devoured widows' houses. They used their public reputation for piety and trustworthiness to administer the estates of men who had just died. And they were able to do this not only because of their reputation, but because the first century when Jesus was ministering was a patriarchal society, and it was deemed, wrongly deemed, but deemed nevertheless, that women were just incapable of handling such weighty matters. And in further work, the scribes received a percentage of the estate. And by the time Jesus arrived on the scene, this system involving the scribes had become notorious for embezzlement and for abuse, all of which made the scribes richer and richer and richer, richer and richer and richer by financially gouging widows and orphans. For this reason, Jesus and others found this appalling, absolutely appalling, because the Hebrew Scriptures, or what we would call the Old Testament, said this was wrong, and that the ultimate test of obeying God's laws, the ultimate test of faith, was the protection of vulnerable people like widows and orphans. So this second reading between the lines stuff tells us that Mark's gospel is portraying Jesus as a staunch opponent of the scribes. And the reason is because they're intentionally using their social and spiritual status and their public reputation for piety and trustworthiness to manipulate and to rob people and to feather their own nests. That ends our second reading between the lines. And now for our third reading between the lines. The storyteller Mark tells us that upon entering the synagogue in Capernaum, upon entering it on the Sabbath day, there in that sacred time and in that sacred place where the scribes held the authority, Jesus is confronted by a man with an unclean spirit. He is confronted by a demon-possessed man who opposes him. As an aside, I should tell you that in Mark and the other New Testament Gospels, an unclean spirit means that this is a spirit contrary to God's goodness. This is a spirit contrary to human relationships. It is a spirit, it's an anti-human spirit that stands against the joy of life in general. It is a metaphor. And that is a long way from Linda Blair's rotating head and guttural sounds and barking like a dog in the Exorcist movie, isn't it? Right away, Mark tells this story that the hostile demon or the unclean spirit defies Jesus and then backs off in terror. Listen again to the words of the demon who has been possessed. Jesus, what do you want with us, you Nazarene? Or some translations have it, why are you meddling with us? Have you come to get rid of us? I know you who you are. You're God's holy man. Now, you probably noticed already that the unclean spirit or the demon, the words put in his mouth by the gospel writer Mark, is speaking in plural pronouns. Plural pronouns. He doesn't say, Jesus, what do you want with me? He says, Jesus, what do you want with us? Us. Yes, us. Plural. So the question is, who is the us in the unclean spirit in defiance of Jesus? On whose behalf is the demon speaking? Richard Horsley and again Ched Myers, two highly respected American New Testament scholars, have studied this question for years. And they have concluded that because of the way the gospel writer Mark framed his story, that the voice of the unclean spirit represents the voice and the inner thoughts and the feelings of the scribes in the synagogue. You see, the scribes regard the synagogue and the Sabbath day as their turf. And they want nothing to do with Jesus invading it, as he did that day. The unclean spirit, or the demon, represents the religious, spiritual, and financial power the scribes have held over ordinary and vulnerable people for a long time, especially their power over widows and orphans. And the point the gospel writer Mark is trying to make is that in this, Jesus' very first act of his public ministry, Jesus first has to break the power of the corrupt scribes and scholars. First, he breaks that power, Mark is saying, and then he goes forward to proclaim the reign of God, his vision of the kingdom of God, which is to say, he begins his ministry of loving compassion to ordinary people and to people on the lower rung of the ladder. Well, what does all this stuff mean? What does all this reading between the lines mean to us who have gathered here this morning? Well, there are several answers to that question. There are some religious answers, there are spiritual answers, there are political answers and social answers, and there are personal answers. And this morning, I'm going to focus on the personal. On the personal. I wonder if we, every one of us, from time to time, might be like that demon-possessed man in the synagogue. I wonder if we ever ask ourselves, Jesus, what do you want with me? What do you want from me, Jesus? And of course, the answer to that question is everything. Jesus wants everything to do with us. Jesus wants us to come out of ourselves. Jesus wants us to exorcise our own metaphorical demons, the demons of pride and lust, the demons of anger and rage, the demons of cynicism and snark, the demons of jealousy, the demon of refusing to forgive another person his wrongdoing, the demons of short-sightedness, despair, hopelessness, and helplessness, the demons of self-obsession and lack of imagination, the demons of behind-the-scenes manipulation. Whatever demon is within us, a metaphorical demon, a symbolic demon, Jesus wants us to exorcise, to free ourselves from whatever is anti-human, whatever is unclean, whatever makes us unhappy. Jesus wants us to exorcise those inner demons that rob us of joy. And he wants us to do that so that we, like the people in the synagogue that day, will be astounded and amazed, for we will be made free to live fully, to love extravagantly, and to become the very best we can be. So may it be. Amen. Let us pray. God, Spirit of life, we do not know what burdens people carry, what demons they wrestle with silently, what triumph it may be for them to appear normal, to be decent, to show up. Give us compassion for each person, aware that spirits haunt us all. Give us the grace to bless and not to judge, to heal and not to hurt, even those who invite hurting. Free each of us from our own demons, our egos and their demands on self and others. We do not know another's inner story, its landscapes, its dark places, its villains. We don't know, and we don't need to know. We only know your tremendous love, even for us and equally for them. Oh God, help us to remember and hear us now in our silent prayers. Please join with me now as we pray together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Since its formation in 1925, the United Church has had a vision of a world filled with peace and justice, a world filled with love and joy. This is true in all our congregations, large and small, and in between. It is our view, too, that our gifts and offerings can make this dream come true. Let us pray our offertory prayers. Oh God, we worship you with our words and our songs, and we praise you with our gifts and our money. Everything we have is yours, and these gifts and offerings are signs of your kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven. Amen. This morning's parting words are printed in your bulletin, the responsive ones. The time has come to leave this sacred place. As you go, may the example and teaching of Jesus of Nazareth keep you from all evil.
So may it be.
May the living Spirit of Jesus endow you with great love and fill you with joy and peace.
So may it be.
And may you share your blessings and experience with others you meet this day and every day.
So may it be.
May the love of God embrace you, the way of Jesus challenge you, and the wisdom of the Spirit renew you.